Welcome to today's historical deep dive. On June 24th, 1812, something truly audacious happened. 500,000 souls, a colossal engine of war and ambition, began crossing a river into the unknown. This wasn't just an army. It was a continent on the march, led by a man who had bent Europe to his will. It was the moment Napoleon, Emperor of the French, stood at the very peak of his power, ready to swallow Russia whole. Or so he believed. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote, or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin, and change the way you think about history. You stand on the banks of the Niemen River, June 24th, 1812. Before you stretches a human sea, 500,000 souls, the Grande Armée, the largest invasion force ever assembled in European history up to that point. They are a ribbon of steel and flesh, glittering with eagles, thundering with cannons, a babel of languages united by loyalty and the terrifying will of one man, Napoleon Bonaparte. You feel the ground tremble beneath your feet, not from cannons yet, but from the sheer weight of ambition marching eastward. This is not just an army. It is an empire on the move, a challenge hurled at the vast, silent heart of Russia. This moment embodies the intoxicating peak of unchecked power. You have bent nations, redrawn maps with the stroke of a pen and the point of a bayonet, and forged an army of unprecedented scale from disparate peoples. What could possibly stop this? The insight here is stark, brutal. At the zenith of ambition, the belief in one's own invincibility becomes the most dangerous weapon, wielded not against an enemy, but against oneself. It's the ultimate tragic irony. The strength that brought you here now blinds you to the cliff edge. Napoleon's decision isn't just strategic, it's a personal wager of impossible scale, fueled by the conviction that he simply could not lose. The moral takeaway? Beware the moment your reach exceeds your grasp, when the sheer scale of your power blinds you to the potential scale of your failure. The future doesn't care how glorious your past victories were. It only awaits your next move, and this move, crossing this river with this colossal force, is the riskiest yet. Ask yourself, was this strategic brilliance on a grand scale, or was it the chilling first step of hubris leading an empire to disaster? The river flows on, indifferent to the eagles crossing it. You march deeper now, beyond Smolensk, into the seemingly endless plains of the Russian interior. The air grows colder, carrying the scent of distant snow, even in the relative warmth of summer. The enemy isn't here. They retreat, always retreat, like a phantom you can't corner. You crave the decisive battle, the grand confrontation that has defined your victories. But the land itself seems to conspire against you. Villages are empty husks, smoking ruins where homes once stood. Crops, so vital for forage, are burned to ash. Wells are poisoned, the water bitter and dangerous. This isn't a withdrawal. It's a deliberate, brutal scouring of the earth, denying your army sustenance, shelter, hope. You watch, with a growing knot of frustration in your gut, as your meticulously planned logistics, designed for the faster, denser campaigns of Central Europe, begin to unravel. Supply lines stretch like brittle threads across this desolate, indifferent landscape. Wagons break down, horses starve on burned grass, men sicken and straggle. their morale eroding with every empty horizon. The enemy isn't an army you can crush with cavalry and cannon. It's the very air, the dust, the gnawing emptiness of distance and the passage of time. Here is the brutal, unfolding insight. True power isn't solely about overwhelming force, about the biggest battalions or the most brilliant tactics on a battlefield. It's about understanding the nature of the challenge before you. Russia's strategy isn't to win battles. They know they likely can't against your Grande Armée in a direct fight. Their genius lies in refusing to fight, in letting distance, time, hunger, and the coming winter fight for them. It's a power born not of strength, but of absence, of yielding the land to consume the invader. The moral lesson is simple, profound, and devastatingly effective. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in yielding, in refusing to engage on the enemy's terms, and simply letting the aggressor exhaust themselves against an empty void. You, Napoleon, the emperor who has commanded fate, who has bent nations to his will, find himself commanded by geography, by climate, by an enemy who won't stand and fight, but melts away like mist. It's a form of passive resistance you've never truly faced. A tragic irony that the master of controlled aggression is defeated by a master of controlled retreat. Your frustration isn't just strategic, it's existential. You stand on endless plains, conquering nothing, owning only the ground beneath your feet, which offers no sustenance, and wonder if you are pursuing an army or simply marching into a trap set by the wind and the snow. Ask yourself, looking back at this endless march, was this perseverance or the stubborn refusal to admit you had already been outmaneuvered? What would you have done, standing in his boots, watching your grand army dwindle without a single major battle fought? Weeks stretch into months, each one a relentless hammer blow against the Grande Armée. The dusty road is your constant companion, a brown ribbon unraveling into infinity. Around you, the meticulous order of your invasion force begins to fray. Soldiers' boots wear thin. Their uniforms are caked in the fine, pervasive dust of Russia. Grumbling is no longer a whisper. It's a low, persistent hum beneath the rhythm of the march. Supplies, meant to last through decisive battles, dwindle with terrifying speed, vanished by the endless road and the scorched earth the Russians leave behind. And the horses, the lifeblood of your cavalry, your artillery, your transport, they die by the thousands. This isn't battle. It's a slow, agonizing bleed. You push them harder, drive yourself harder. Why? Because you are chasing a ghost. You crave the battle, the climactic confrontation on an open field that will shatter the enemy's will. Just as you broke the Austrians at Austerlitz. You visualize it, your corps deploying perfectly, the crushing charge, the enemy scattering, the glorious victory entering the annals of history. This is the vision you carry, the one that justifies every aching step, every lost horse, every hungry belly. But Russia refuses to fight on your terms. They melt away, leaving only empty villages and the distant smoke of burning fields. The battles that come are not decisive clashes, but cruel, harassing skirmishes, engagements on ground of their choosing, designed to bleed you dry, not deliver victory. You are conquering ground, yes, immense, empty, silent ground. Moscow itself lies ahead, a glittering, unattainable prize. But with every league gained, you are marching deeper into a trap of your own making, a vast, indifferent wilderness that consumes armies. This relentless pursuit, this refusal to acknowledge that the enemy has a strategy utterly alien to your own, reveals a chilling truth about your ambition. Sometimes, the desperate, almost pathological need for a defining, glorious victory becomes a self-inflicted wound. Your ego demands the grand triumph, the thunderous battle that proves your genius beyond doubt. But the truly wise leader knows when the rules of the game have changed, when the enemy is playing chess on a different board, when adaptation and cutting losses are the only path to survival. You believed your desire for a decisive battle was destiny. It was merely a fatal miscalculation. You chased the reflection of Austerlitz across a continent that offered only mirages. The moral is etched in the dust and the dying horses. Be utterly wary of chasing ghosts. What you want the enemy to do, what your strategy requires them to do for you to win, might be the precise opposite of what they will do. And mistaking your fervent desire for reality, convincing yourself that your will alone can bend the enemy to your preferred confrontation, is not just a strategic error. It is a fatal flaw for an emperor. Ask yourself, was this persistence brilliance or blinding obsession? The plains stretch out before you, vast and deceptively peaceful in the pre-dawn light. This is Borodino, September 7th, 1812. Finally, the Russians have chosen to stand, their lines a grim, determined silhouette against the horizon. This flat, open ground is perfect, designed, it seems, for the grand maneuvers, the sweeping artillery barrages that are your signature. As the sun rises, you unleash the full, terrifying might of the Grande Armée. The roar of cannons begins, a single guttural beast that swallows all other sound. It builds to a deafening crescendo, shaking the very earth beneath your feet. The air thickens with powder smoke, acrid and chokingly heavy, mingling with the metallic tang of fresh blood, even from a distance. You watch your veterans, the lions who followed you across Europe, charge into the storm, die in droves, and then, incredibly, charge again. They take the Russian redoubts and positions at a terrible, unimaginable cost. This is not war as you've known it. It is a slaughterhouse on an industrial scale. The Russians, under Kutuzov, fight with a desperate, unyielding tenacity that surprises and frustrates you. They refuse to break completely, absorbing blow after blow, giving ground grudgingly, contesting every foot with bayonet and cannon. As night falls, the firing slowly dies, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the silence of the dead. You hold the field. The enemy has withdrawn. By all traditional measures, this is a victory. But look closer. This is the brutal, undeniable nature of a Pyrrhic victory laid bare. You gaze upon the casualty lists. Tens of thousands of your finest troops are gone, irrevocably lost, lying cold on the Russian soil. These men, veterans, forged in the crucible of your previous campaigns, are irreplaceable in the heart of this vast, hostile country. The enemy army, battered and bleeding, is still intact, their core structure unbroken, their will seemingly indomitable. Here lies the profound moral reflection, a victory that cripples you more severely and it cripples your enemy is not a victory at all. It is a strategic defeat disguised by captured ground. Sometimes the most profound, campaign-ending losses occur on the very day you plant your flag on conquered soil. Ask yourself, Was this battle the necessary sacrifice to open the road to Moscow? Or was it the final, fatal bleed-out of your magnificent army's strength? The true cost of ambition is paid in blood, and today, the price extracted at Borodino is astronomical. It is a debt that Moscow, when you reach it, will never be able to repay. You ride into Moscow, September 14th, 1812, a conquering emperor at the head of a vast, depleted army. The air vibrates with anticipation. You expect the symbolic moment, the city's keys offered, the Tsar's emissaries humbled, the grand prize of this brutal campaign finally within your grasp. You see the domes, the spires, the iconic silhouette of the ancient capital rising from the plains. This is it, victory. But as you enter, a chilling silence greets you. The streets are empty, the windows dark. No crowds, no welcoming committees, no desperate pleas for mercy. The city is a hollow shell, deserted, its pulse deliberately stopped. The entire population has fled, a mass exodus orchestrated or simply born of dread and the Tsar's grim resolve. You haven't taken a city, you've entered a vacuum. Then the smoke begins. Thin tendrils at first, then thick plumes billowing from every district, a macabre performance unfolding around you. The sky turns an apocalyptic orange, the sun a jaundiced eye through the haze. Fires erupt, seemingly everywhere at once. Arsonists, perhaps, following scorched earth orders, or simply the inevitable chaos, the destructive entropy of abandonment. The cause is a subject for future debate, but the result is horrifyingly clear. Moscow, the ancient heart, burns before your eyes. This wasn't the surrender you envisioned. This wasn't victory. This is a chilling, undeniable insight into the true limits of conquest. You command armies. You seize territory. You dictate terms at the point of a bayonet. But you cannot seize a people's intangible will, their spirit, their capacity for sacrifice. Nor, as the flames consume timber and stone, can you control the sheer destructive force of chaos itself? Russia has not met you on the battlefield for this final confrontation. They have sacrificed their own heart to deny you satisfaction, proving that true resistance isn't always found in a charge, but sometimes in a devastating retreat, a willingness to destroy what is dearest, to make it worthless to the invader. What seemed like the ultimate prize, the capture of the symbolic capital, has, in an instant, turned into a trap, a burning monument to a catastrophic miscalculation. You are left with ashes, ruins, and the horrifying realization that sometimes the greatest act of defiance isn't fighting back, but simply walking away and leaving your enemy with nothing but ruin. Ask yourself, was this simply brilliant, brutal strategy by the Russians, or a horrifying testament to the unexpected, uncontrollable forces unleashed by invasion? You arrive in the Kremlin, the symbolic heart of an empire, but the air you breathe is thick with the smell of burnt timber and despair. Around you, Moscow smolders, a vast, self-inflicted wound, a monument to stubborn resistance, not surrender. Here, amidst the sacred stones and twisted metal, you establish your temporary court. You wait. The fate of your campaign, the fate of Europe, hinges on this silence. Day after day, messengers ride out through the ruined streets, carrying terms you believe the Tsar must accept. The capital is taken. Surely, the conventional logic of warfare dictates surrender. Surely, the loss of this ancient city is a wound too deep to ignore. You expect capitulation, a message bearing the formal acknowledgement of your victory, the end to this brutal, drawn-out conflict. But no word returns. Only the wind whistles through broken windows, carrying the mournful cry of distant wolves. The silence from St. Petersburg is not capitulation. It is defiance. It is a chilling void where you expected negotiation. The days shorten with alarming speed, each sunset bringing a sharper bite to the air. The cold seeps into your bones, mirroring the growing isolation. You are deep in hostile territory, surrounded by ashes, adrift in an enemy sea. Your once invincible Grande Armée, denied battle and victory, feels the rot set in. Discipline frays. Strength ebbs away like the melting snows of spring you now long for. Winter, the true Tsar of Russia, is fast approaching. Here, in the heart of this ruin, a crucial truth crystallizes with brutal clarity. The brilliance required to seize power, to march an army across a continent and capture a capital, is utterly different from the subtle, agonizing patience needed to consolidate it, or, cruelly, to understand an enemy who fights not with armies alone, but with land, time, and an almost mystical resolve. Your assumption that capturing the capital guarantees terms, that Moscow is Russia's heart, in the same way Paris is France's, is fundamentally, devastatingly wrong. It reveals a profound blind spot, a failure to grasp an opponent who values his country's spirit, his time, and his moral independence above any single city. You assumed they would play by your rules, by the conventional logic of European conquest. You assumed they shared your definition of what was valuable enough to surrender for. They do not. They are playing a different game entirely, one where scorched earth is a tactic and silence is a weapon you cannot counter. This failure to comprehend your opponent, this stubborn expectation that they must react as you would, becomes your undoing. Your greatest strength, your lightning-fast, decisive action, the very thing that delivered you to this ruined throne, becomes a crippling liability. Here, patience is required. Understanding is paramount, and you are frozen by circumstance, by the ever-deepening cold, and by a failure to comprehend this unfamiliar opponent who has vanished like a ghost into the snow. Ask yourself, watching him wait in the Kremlin, was this the strategic miscalculation of a military genius, or the profound self-delusion of a man who could no longer imagine defeat? Weeks bleed into a grim tableau within the burned husk of the city. Ash scents the frigid air, a constant reminder of what was lost and what is now trapped. Your advisors, their faces etched with frost and desperation, gather daily in the drafty chambers you occupy. Voices low but urgent. Retreat, they plead. Now, before the roads are impassable, before the cold claims us all. But you hesitate. A paralysis born of stubborn pride holds you captive. To leave Moscow is to admit the unthinkable. The grand design, the invasion that was to humble the Tsar and secure the continent, has failed. You cling to the illusion of negotiation, sending messages into the void, hoping for a sign from Alexander, a desperate, irrational belief that diplomacy can salvage this ruin. It is a king trying to command the tide to turn back. The cold deepens its bite each passing day. A relentless, invisible enemy. The fierce optimism that propelled the Grande Armée across the Niemen, across vast plains and bloody battlefields, has long since evaporated. Apprehension is a physical weight in the air, settling like the early snow. You walk among your soldiers, their faces gaunt, their eyes reflecting not the glory of empire, but the raw fear of freezing. The strategic window for an orderly withdrawal is not merely closing, it is slamming shut with terrifying speed. This agonizing delay is perhaps the most profound, most tragic insight into the man you are. It reveals the monumental cost of an ego's refusal to accept failure. To order the retreat now, before terms are dictated, before victory is declared, is to confront the brutal limits of your legendary will against the boundless space and time of Russia, against the inevitable, crushing power of the coming winter. It is a confrontation with reality, stark and unforgiving, that you desperately avoid. You, the master strategist, are outmaneuvered not by an army, but by geography and climate, and your own hubris delays the inevitable reckoning. The moral weight is crushing. Delay born of denial, however powerful the denial, proves exponentially more costly than a timely, painful retreat. The ability to recognize, admit, and act upon a mistake, even one of colossal scale, is the hallmark of true resilience. It is a trait you are failing to exhibit now, and the price will be paid in blood and ice. Ask yourself, is the courage to admit failure a greater mark of leadership than the will to never yield? What would you have done, standing amidst the frozen ruins, the fate of hundreds of thousands resting on your acknowledgement of defeat? Finally, the order comes. The long, agonizing wait in the silent, half-burnt city is over. You give the command, and on October 19th, 1812, the Grande Armée, or what remains of it, begins its slow march out of Moscow. Your plan, meticulously laid out despite the chaos, is to swing south towards the fertile lands around Kaluga, finding fresh supplies and a route untouched by the advance. You envision a strategic withdrawal, a temporary setback before the inevitable recovery. The first steps are taken with this hope, this desperate belief in a calculated escape. But fate, that capricious, brutal force, has other plans. At Maloya-Roslovets, the Russians block your intended path. A fierce, bloody battle erupts, a brutal clash for a route you are ultimately denied. The cost is too high, the resistance too fierce. There is no forcing passage south now. With a chilling certainty, you realize the only road left open is the one you took coming in. The northern route, the ravaged road, the path already stripped bare by the hungry advance of your own million-man army months ago. This is not a strategic withdrawal. It is a forced retreat onto a starvation track. The land offers nothing. Every village is a ruin, every field barren, picked clean by the initial invasion force. And worse, far worse, the road is not empty. It is littered with the grim detritus of the advance. Broken wagons, abandoned cannons, frozen horses, and the unburied bodies of your own soldiers who fell on the way in. You are now marching over the bones of your own dead, a macabre carpet laid out by past ambition. The grand march eastward, dreamt of as a conquest, becomes a desperate, nightmarish shuffle westward, haunted by the ghosts of what was lost. It is in this forced turn onto the desolate road that you confront a profound, terrifying truth. You, Napoleon, the man who redrew maps, who commanded empires, who bent nations to your will, are utterly powerless against circumstance. Your brilliant plan for a strategic withdrawal, your carefully charted route to safety and sustenance, is denied by a single battle a twist of fate, the carefully constructed illusion of absolute control shatters. You can plan, you can command, but ultimately, external factors, the enemy's stand, the geography, the sheer consequence of your own past actions, conspire to box you in. The road back, you now understand with a sickening clarity, is steeper and colder than you could have ever imagined. Ask yourself, when have your most carefully laid plans been utterly derailed by events beyond your control? What does that moment reveal about the limits of power, even for the mightiest? The air bites, a foretaste of the hell to come. The retreat from Moscow is not just a withdrawal. It is the unraveling of an empire, a death march that beggars the imagination. You watch, helpless, as the first snowflakes drift down. Gentle at first, then thicker, relentless. They are the vanguard of the deep Russian winter, a force more formidable than any army you have ever faced. Temperatures plummet with unimaginable ferocity. Your Grande Armée, equipped for a summer campaign, for swift conquest, is now freezing. Wool uniforms designed for temperate climates offer little protection against the negative 30 degrees Celsius or 22 Fahrenheit and lower temperatures that soon grip the land. Horses, the engine of your army, collapse and die by the thousand. Without them, cannons, the thunder of your battles, are abandoned. Wagons laden with precious supplies or looted treasures are left behind. The carefully constructed logistical chain snaps like frozen glass. Hunger becomes a constant, gnawing agony. Soldiers, once the proud vanguard of Europe, are reduced to scavenging, fighting over scraps, boiling shoe leather, or resorting to cannibalism. Discipline, the bedrock of your military machine, dissolves under this relentless pressure. Ranks melt away as men abandon their posts to search for food or warmth, or simply to escape the unbearable suffering. The once Grand Army, numbering over 500,000 just months ago, disintegrates into desperate, freezing mobs huddled around dying fires, indistinguishable from the peasants they once conquered. This descent into chaos reveals a brutal, humbling truth. Even the most disciplined force is terrifyingly fragile when subjected to unimaginable and prolonged hardship. The bonds of command, forged on 100 battlefields, and even the ties of comradeship fray and snap under the relentless assault of cold and hunger. The emperor who commanded kings, who dictated the fate of nations, cannot even command the weather. You stand amidst this horror, your own resolve tested. This is not the glory of Austerlitz. It is the crucible of survival. True leadership, you realize, is tested not in the brilliant maneuvers of conquest, but in the bleak, soul-crushing struggle simply to endure, to maintain order, to inspire hope, or even just to protect the few who remain loyal when facing the overwhelming, indifferent power of nature itself. Ask yourself, when all you have built is freezing and starving around you, are you still a leader, or just another man trying not to die? The Berezina River looms, a menacing stretch of gray water, partially frozen, but a treacherous, thin ice cover mocks any thought of walking across. You reach its banks with the shattered remnants of your Grand Army, only to find disaster compounding disaster. Russian armies, sensing the kill, converge like wolves from north and south, boxing you against this impassable barrier. The trap is sprung. This is not a battlefield of grand strategy. It is a test of raw survival, a crucible forged in ice and desperation. Hope rests on the shoulders of a few hundred engineers. Heroes anonymity will largely forget. Under constant enemy fire, freezing in the icy water, they perform miracles, raising flimsy pontoon bridges from salvaged timber and sheer, frost-bitten will. They build, they fall, others take their place, a living, dying chain battling the current and the cold. It is perhaps the most profound display of loyalty and engineering grit in the entire campaign. An almost impossible feat against overwhelming odds. You stand on the bank, a solitary figure against the backdrop of unfolding catastrophe, directing the desperate, surging flow of humanity onto the fragile structures. The scene is horrifying chaos. Thousands, driven by the primal urge to live, flood the bridges. Some make it across, scrambling over the ice-slicked planks. Others, weighed down by bundles or simply pushed by the crush, plunge through the breaking ice into the frigid water, their screams quickly silenced. Wagons, cannons, the wounded, the weak, they are abandoned, left on the far bank as the bridges, once the lifeline, are torched to slow the relentless Russian pursuit. This is leadership stripped bare. In organizing the crossing, you show moments of decisive command, carving a path through the pandemonium. But the scale of the loss, the brutal, desperate choices made, who gets a place on the bridge, who is left behind to face capture or death, are staggering. There is no glory here, only the stark, brutal calculus of survival. It's a moment that reveals the raw, often horrifying, core of human nature when the veneer of civilization is stripped away. You save a fragment of your army, perhaps 20,000 out of hundreds of thousands, but at an unbearable cost, leaving behind a trail of unimaginable suffering, the ultimate tragic irony of a strategic retreat turned into a desperate fight for individual survival. Ask yourself, what would you have done, standing on that bank, watching that nightmare unfold? What lives would you sacrifice to save a remnant? December 5th, 1812, Smorgoni. The cold bites deeper than any bayonet. The Grande Armée, this titan you forged, is a ghost, a scattering of frozen wraiths stumbling through the snow. You stand amidst this wreckage, the bitter wind whipping around you, and you make a decision that will forever scorch your legend. A choice so stark, so absolute, it stuns even your closest marshals. You will leave. Command is handed to Murat, the cavalryman king, an odd shepherd for this broken flock. You bundle into a sleigh, a handful of loyal companions joining you, and turn your back on the suffering. The runners carve a path through the endless white, racing west, back to Paris. 13 days. You cover the distance in 13 days, a blur of urgency against the glacial pace of your dying army. The official justification: you must raise new armies, secure the heart of the empire, the source of all power. A pragmatic, chilling necessity. But for the soldiers left behind, freezing, starving, dying on that brutal road, it feels like nothing less than abandonment. The general, the emperor, the very man who demanded everything of them has departed. The shepherd has left the flock to the wolves. This moment, more than any coronation or conquest, is perhaps the most searing insight into your core priority. The preservation of your personal power, the throne upon which your identity is fused with the state, outweighs the immediate fate of the thousands who pledged their lives to you. It is a brutal calculation, a cold equation where individual human cost is sacrificed for the abstract future of the empire, your empire. At the highest levels of leadership, such horrifying choices can be seen as necessary evils, prioritizing the survival of the state, the long game, over the immediate, agonizing suffering of individuals. But such choices leave an indelible stain. They erode loyalty, they breed cynicism, and they challenge the very idea of heroic leadership, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth about the cost of ultimate ambition. Ask yourself, when does pragmatism become cruelty? What would you have done, standing in Napoleon's boots, with the empire crumbling and your own power at stake? This decision is a monument to the brutal calculus of power, a moment of tragic irony where the architect of glory becomes the symbol of desertion. The first whispers arrive like snowflakes, light, easily dismissed. From the frozen plains of Russia, couriers, ragged and hollow-eyed, bring fragmented tales. The Grande Armée, that thunderbolt of Europe, is not merely retreating, it is dissolving. Initial reports are waved away as exaggeration, enemy propaganda. How could the force that conquered kingdoms vanish? How could you, the architect of Austerlitz and Jena, suffer such ruin? But the whispers persist, growing in volume, hardening into brutal, undeniable fact. Gradually, painstakingly, the horrifying truth filters through the courts, the chancelleries, the salons of a continent held captive by your will. The numbers begin to pile up like the frozen dead, hundreds of thousands lost to the snow, the Cossacks, the sheer, unforgiving scale of the Russian winter. The finest soldiers of France and its allies, the veterans forged in a dozen campaigns, are gone. The cavalry, the infantry, the artillery, the very sinews of your power are annihilated. It is not a defeat. It is an extinction event for the force that reshaped Europe. The Grande Armée, the symbol of your irresistible might, exists now mostly as ghosts haunting the road back from Moscow. Europe is stunned. For years, you have been less a man, more a force of nature. The belief in your invincibility was a tangible weapon, often winning battles before a shot was fired. Opponents hesitated, allies deferred, populations submitted, convinced of the futility of resistance. Now, that weapon is broken. The aura is shattered, not by a rival general's genius, but by a campaign of unparalleled self-destruction. The world had treated you based on the belief in your inevitable success, and that belief lies broken on the ice. This isn't just a military defeat. It's a psychological earthquake felt in every palace and parliament. Courts across the continent, for so long paralyzed by awe and fear, begin to stir. The monarchs you had humbled, the nations you had subjugated, see not the emperor, but a man whose greatest army is gone. They sense weakness. They see opportunity. Coalitions that had seemed impossible moments before start to form in the flickering candlelight of clandestine meetings. Your strength, you now see with chilling clarity, was built not just on the bayonets you commanded, but on the belief in their unyielding power. A surprising truth emerges. The edifice of your empire was supported by a foundation of pure reputation, a fragile structure built on constant victory. Reputations forged in the white heat of continuous triumph are perhaps the most fragile of all. A single, spectacular failure can unravel years of accumulated awe and respect, faster than any enemy army. The world doesn't just react to your actions, it reacts to what it believes you are capable of. That belief, for so long your shield and sword, is now your greatest vulnerability. Ask yourself, is a reputation for invincibility a strength or a trap? December 18th, 1812. You arrive back in Paris, a ghost materialized from the frozen plains of Russia. The city buzzes, not with triumph, but with whispers of your death. General Mallet, fueled by these very rumors, has attempted a coup, declaring the emperor dead, trying to unravel the threads of your empire while you were still shivering through the Berezina. You appear, and the fragile rebellion collapses like a house of cards built on sand. The speed with which the conspirators are rounded up and executed underscores the raw power still resident in your presence, even after disaster. But your return is not a moment of rest. It is a sprint against time. You immediately throw yourself into the monumental task of raising a new army. France, already bled white by years of campaigning, is now scraped bare. You summon the Marie-Louise conscription class early, boys barely old enough to hold a musket, old men, veterans of past wars, or simply those not yet called, are pulled from their farms and workshops. It is a nation's last gasp, a desperate attempt to conjure soldiers from the ether. The fields lie fallow, the workshops slow, as the very lifeblood of France is diverted to the insatiable maw of war. Your energy is furious, tireless. You work with an intensity that defies belief. Crisscrossing the country, rallying support, overseeing logistics, showing the world that the spirit, the will to fight, the ambition remains unbroken. This frantic activity is a raw display of resilience. Defeat is not an option. It is merely a temporary setback to be overcome with sheer force of will. You refuse to yield, to accept the shattering verdict of Russia. You are the storm, and you must rebuild yourself, molecule by molecule, no matter the cost. Yet this desperate scrabble reveals a chilling truth. You cannot replace the 500,000 veterans lost in the snows. Experience, leadership, the hard-won camaraderie of battle. These cannot be conjured from boys and old men. This effort, admirable in its defiant energy, is also tragically ironic. To mend the gaping wound inflicted by your own overreach in Russia, you must inflict a deeper, more painful wound upon France itself. You demand impossible sacrifices from your people, forcing them to bear the crushing weight of your ambition, even as that ambition has just cost them so dearly. Adversity, they say, reveals character. Do you crumble under the weight of catastrophe, or do you fight, no matter the cost? You choose to fight, demonstrating a relentless drive that is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. But ask yourself, at what point does resilience become a destructive refusal to face reality? When does the fight for survival demand sacrifices that hollow out the very nation you seek to lead? This frantic energy, while demonstrating the enduring power of your will, also starkly highlights the unsustainable cost of a self-inflicted wound, demanding the unimaginable to mend the irreparable. The snow-bitten remnants of the Grande Armée stagger back, a spectral echo of the force that marched into Russia. You, Napoleon, the unconquered, stand watching the trickle return, and the world smells your vulnerability. The unthinkable has happened. You were defeated, not by an army, but by winter, distance, and a nation's defiant refusal to bend. This catastrophe is more than a military loss. It's a signal fire across Europe. For years, you have rewritten maps, installed kings, dictated terms. Your dominance was absolute, breeding a deep, simmering resentment beneath the surface of forced alliances and conquered territories. Now, the ice cracks. The first to move is Prussia, your supposedly loyal junior partner. Seeing the extent of the devastation, feeling the tremor of your weakened grip, they break free, signing an alliance with Russia, the very nation you just fought. It's a stunning betrayal, a domino falling that sends shivers through the continent. Your ally by marriage, Austria, watches keenly from Vienna. Prince Metternich, a master of calculated diplomacy, begins to subtly pivot, testing the winds, preparing to abandon your side if the opportunity solidifies. Even Sweden, ruled by your former Marshal Bernadotte, now King Charles XIV John, declares war. A new coalition is not forming. It is surging into existence, fueled by years of humiliation, a hunger for lost lands, and the raw, electrifying scent of your weakness. This isn't just a collection of states. It's a continent united by the desire for equilibrium, for the balance you shattered to be restored, violently if necessary. Every victory you savored, every crown you placed on a brother's head, every nation you subjected, each act sowed the seeds of this moment. Power, absolute and overbearing, creates enemies. Weakness, exposed and undeniable, invites their collective assault. You see the forces gathering, a storm brewing on all horizons. The system you dominated for so long, bending it to your will, is now reacting, pushing back with immense pent-up energy. It's history's unavoidable truth. Break the scales of power so dramatically, and an equally dramatic counterforce will rise to correct it. Ask yourself, was the scale of your ambition always destined to generate this level of resistance? Or could you have built an empire that endured, rather than one that simply created a colossal weight for Europe to heave off its shoulders the moment you faltered? The nations are rising, Napoleon. The reckoning has begun. The snows of Russia have melted. The Grande Armée is a shattered myth, and yet here you are, raising armies once more. The year is 1813, then 1814, but you are fighting the campaigns of these years with ghosts at your side. The faces are new, the uniforms fresh, but these are not the veterans forged in the fires of Austerlitz or Jena. They are young conscripts, thrust into a maelstrom they cannot comprehend. The quality of your troops is diminished, a pale imitation of the force that once dominated Europe. Perhaps the most brutal consequence is the cavalry. Russia devoured your horses, the vital eyes and ears of your army, the thunderbolt that shattered enemy lines. Without them, you are fighting blind, your strategic speed crippled. Your marshals report back. Scouting is poor. Pursuit of defeated enemies is impossible, and the decisive hammer blow, your signature move, is blunted. You win battles, Lutzen, Bautzen, but they are Pyrrhic. The enemy escapes, often intact, having learned your tactics, no longer awed by your name alone. They know how to face you now, how to exploit your weaknesses, especially your dwindling cavalry, and critically, they vastly outnumber you. The coalition is larger, more coordinated, and fueled by a burning desire to see your reign end. Every battle in these years is harder, every victory more costly in blood and irreplaceable soldiers. Every strategic retreat pushes you closer to France's borders, the iron ring tightening. The Russian campaign wasn't just a catastrophic retreat. It was a wound that continues to bleed out across years, sapping your strength, undermining your genius. It was the shattering of your primary instrument of power, the invincible Grande Armée, and a profound blow to the morale of those who remained. The decision to march on Moscow and the brutal manner of the retreat wasn't just a single failure, it initiated a cascading failure. It stripped you of the veterans, the cavalry, the aura of invincibility, and gave your enemies the time and confidence to unite and learn. What would you have done, standing in his boots, knowing that the very tools of your power had been irrevocably broken by a single, monumental error? Ask yourself, is it possible to recover from a mistake that fundamentally alters the landscape of conflict against you? This period shows that some decisions are so profound, so damaging, that their effects ripple outwards, creating a momentum of decline that is almost impossible to reverse, no matter how brilliant the mind still trying to steer the ship. You understand, perhaps too late, the potential cascading failures of your decisions. A single act of overreach can create a shadow so long it darkens the path to ruin for years to come. You stand on the cold, gray shore of Elba. The wind whips around you, a stark contrast to the protected chambers of the Tuileries. From master of a continent, you are now sovereign of a few square miles, ruling a toy kingdom where fishermen replace marshals and the Grand Army is a handful of guards. Time stretches before you, vast and empty, a mirror held up to a life lived at breakneck speed. This is exile, not just from Paris, but from the very engine of your ambition. Here, perhaps, you could have learned, reflected on the dizzying ascent and the swift, brutal fall. But the fire still burns. Reflection gives way to restlessness. The reports from France are a siren song. The Bourbon king is unpopular. The army is loyal. The people remember the glory. The temptation is too great. You make the decision, one born of unyielding ambition, not wisdom. Escape. The 100 Days, a breathtaking gamble, sees you march unopposed to Paris. The ultimate demonstration of personal magnetism and a nation's fickle heart. It feels like resurrection, a phoenix rising from the ashes of abdication. Yet it is also an act of profound self-deception, a refusal to acknowledge the fundamental shifts in the European landscape and the weariness of your own people. You believe you can simply will history back into submission. This defiance of reality culminates on the muddy fields of Waterloo. The meticulously planned battle unravels, a storm of iron and blood, decided by chance, missed signals, and the arrival of Prussian bayonets. The thunder of the Grande Armée is finally silenced, not just for a day, but forever. The world breathes a collective sigh of relief, and you are once again defeated. This time, the exile is absolute. St. Helena, a speck of rock in the vast, indifferent South Atlantic. There is no escape from this prison of geography and fate. Here, under the watchful eyes of your British captors, the final chapter unfolds. You dictate memoirs, meticulously shaping your narrative, crafting the legend of Napoleon, the visionary martyr, the misunderstood titan. You relive campaigns, justify decisions, and paint yourself as the architect of modernity, thwarted by antiquated powers. But is this true introspection, or merely the final act of controlling the story? Do you grapple with the millions lost, the nations ravaged, the fundamental consequences of your relentless drive? Or do you simply rewrite the script, excusing the cost for the sake of the performance? Ask yourself, in this desolate quiet, stripped of power and pomp, Does true self-awareness finally dawn? Or is the legend crafting a final, desperate refusal to confront the man behind the myth? The ultimate irony lies here. Granted infinite time for reflection, you choose to curate legacy instead. Power and ambition blinded you in the world. On St. Helena, the memory of power and ambition continues to obscure the truth. The silence of the island isn't just geographical. It's the silence of a man who could shake the world, but ultimately failed to truly understand himself or the human cost of his towering will. Greatness without self-awareness leads not to lasting empire, but to a lonely rock and a carefully edited history. The silence descends, thick and heavy as the snows that fell on the road from Moscow. You stand in history's quiet chamber, looking back at the year 1812. It began with a thunderclap of ambition, a display of power unmatched in its time. The Grande Armée, 1,000,000 men massed, ready to march eastwards. This wasn't just a military expedition. It was the ultimate test of will, an emperor challenging a continent, a man defying geography itself. The drums beat, the standards fly, the sun glints on polished brass and steel. You see yourself then, radiating absolute confidence, believing the sheer force of your will could bend nations, could conquer distance and climate. Russia would yield. Its vastness would shrink under the pressure of your organized might. It was the sublime height of your strategic vision, the dazzling, audacious stroke on the global map. Yet, even then, whispers of doubt might have reached your ear. Logistics stretched thin, the sheer scale of the undertaking chilling the blood of even loyal marshals. But you were beyond hearing. The momentum of ambition was too great. The march turns into a crawl. The advance bogs down in the endless plains. The enemy refuses the pitched battle you crave, trading ground for time, space for strategy. And then, the true opponent reveals itself. Not the Tsar's armies, but the unforgiving, brutal reality of the Russian winter. The cold bites, gnawing at flesh, freezing supplies, shattering discipline. The glorious army, the pinnacle of European military might, is reduced to starving stragglers. Phantom figures staggering through a white hell, the vision of conquest dissolves into a horrifying plunge, a grotesque parody of the triumphant entry you had planned. This was the ridiculous. The retreat from Moscow isn't just a military defeat. It's a profound human tragedy played out on an epic scale. A monument to the chilling dangers of believing one's will is absolute, capable of overriding the fundamental laws of nature. Perhaps, in the numb clarity of the retreat, huddled against the crushing cold, the truth became undeniable. From the sublime height of invasion to the ridiculous horror of survival, there was indeed but one step. You lost not because of a clever maneuver or a superior opposing force, but because you pushed beyond the edge of reality, fueled by ego and a refusal to acknowledge limits. You challenged winter and geography, and they answered with annihilation. The lesson of 1812 echoes, a chilling, timeless warning carried on the wind through the Berezina. Unchecked ambition, fueled by ego and a refusal to acknowledge limits, inevitably leads to catastrophe. Power without wisdom, without a grounding in harsh reality, is a destructive force, turning strength into weakness, victory into ruin. Look around today. Do you see leaders, strivers, nations pushing boundaries, chasing impossible goals? Sometimes, history seems determined to repeat its most painful lessons. The ghosts of the Grande Armée, buried in the frozen earth, whisper, "Know when to stop. Know when to turn back. Know that even emperors are mortal, and nature answers to no man's will." The drive for dominance can blind us to the harsh realities of the world, or the resilience of those we oppose. What if history is repeating itself, even now, in ways we cannot yet see? The echo of 1812 is the sound of limits being ignored and the price being paid in full. This was the moment where the edifice of invincibility truly cracked, where the world saw that even Napoleon could break against a wall of ice and snow, a wall built not by men, but by reality itself. It wasn't just a battle lost. It was a fundamental miscalculation of man's place in the face of the world's vast, indifferent power. It's the cold truth that hubris often leads to the most chilling defeats. In the end, it wasn't the battlefield that defeated him. It was believing he couldn't lose.